Revenge really isn't very sweet. Sure, sometimes it temporarily makes us feel good, but it also cultivates criminal behavior. Up to 20% of homicides and 60% of school shootings are linked to revenge. And then what of the Avenger? Is their life changed for the better? Of course not. There's a quote that says, if you go on a mission of revenge, you should start by digging 2 graves. One for your enemy and one for yourself.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes. So have you been listening to our new favorite podcast?
Yes, The Unlovely Truth. Mm-hmm. Lori is doing such a great job over there. I noticed this week on her Instagram that she has a new format. She's going to be releasing episodes on the 1st and the 15th of each month because she's freeing up some time. She says she's working on a project.
Ooh.
I'm excited to hear what it is. In the meantime, I'm just trying to go back and listen to all of her older stuff and get caught up.
Right.
So I especially enjoy her older episodes where she really talks about the true crime.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah.
So if you haven't checked her out, be sure that you go over and listen to The Unlovely Truth, but with Lori Morrison.
Yes.
Okay, so I have another Florida story for you.
Oh, fun.
Curtis always says interesting things and people come out of Florida.
Oh, yeah. Last time when he was talking about Florida Man, I was literally laughing out loud while I was listening to him. Because I guess our listeners may not know that we don't know what's going to come out of Curtis's mouth.
We've had to take out stuff before.
Oh, yes. We have had to censor Curtis.
He is so funny. And he gets really mad when we do, but it's funny. So I'm going to tell you about a lady that is nicknamed Mean Marie.
Oh, gosh.
And she was out of Leesburg, Florida. It's Central Florida.
Okay.
So Marie Dean Arrington was born in Leesburg, Florida on August 8th in 1933. I do know that Florida at that time was segregated. Yeah, there were a lot of racial issues going on down there for sure at the time. The only thing that Marie would say, kind of alluding to her childhood, was that bitterness was what kept her going and that she was never handed anything. She said everything she ever got, she had to fight like hell for. She said that she had to leave school in the 6th grade. But there was one thing she was proud of, and that was that her kids never looked up at her and said, "Mama, I'm hungry."
Oh, wow. So she obviously had been hardened by some rough life.
Definitely. Marie was never afraid of the law. She said she just wasn't. She always knew that if she broke the law, she'd go to jail someday, and that was just a chance she was willing to take. She had a personality that everybody liked. She always dressed fashionably pretty. She always kept her hair in whatever the style was. She was kind of a charmer. So anyway, she was working at this motel as a maid in Leesburg. She was making 75 cents an hour when she looked at herself in the mirror and said, "What the H am I working for?"
Wow.
She decided that she was never going to scrub another floor ever again. And she went for the buck. She fell in love with rackets, earning as much as $800 a week.
Wow.
And back then, that was a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
She was running dope, running numbers, and counterfeit money between Miami and Central Florida. She would dress up like a maid, take a cab to some fancy hotel in Miami Beach, and then go up to the room and make a pickup or a drop off. It was easy money. But by the time she was in her 20s, she had 5 children, and she was married to an ex-cop, named Lester Jack Arrington. And he actually used to train boxers.
So interesting. And was he an ex-cop because he was retired? Or
I don't know.
Or he just was not on the force for some reason?
I'm not sure. I do know that when she met him, he was working as a bouncer at a nightclub.
Okay.
So interesting.
That is interesting.
Now, by all accounts, she was a really good mother, though. She genuinely loved her children. She was nurturing, loving her kids. They said that they never went without. She just kind of thrived in that role. But her marriage wasn't as good. She just, wasn't really a happy marriage. Marie thought like a criminal, too. She just did. She had that way of thinking. In fact, people would look back and talk about her later and say ever since she was young, she just kind of had that criminal mind. And nothing, not even her children, could change that. And so even though she wanted more for them than that life, and she did try to raise them to do right, she herself wasn't doing right in front of them. Marie's first conviction wasn't her first crime by a long shot, but her first conviction was in 1956 when she was 23 years old. She was working at that Leesburg motel as a maid, and she somehow tied up the manager of the hotel and then managed to tie herself up. So I don't know if they were in on this together. I was not clear about that. But I know that when cops arrived, she told them, that they had been robbed. And they actually believed her until they noticed these fresh cigarette butts around the chair that she'd been tied to. And they were like, I don't think she could smoke cigarettes while being tied up like that. And so she realized that there was no way she was going to get out of that. And she eventually confessed to the robbery, and she did 18 months in prison.
And she banked that in her notes of what not to do.
That's exactly right. In between all this, though, Marie was still the doting mother that she was. Marie's husband, Jack, ended up being killed on July 4th in 1964 on Bethune Beach. She actually was the one to shoot and kill him.
Oh.
Now, she claimed the shooting was an accident, but her lawyer said that it was self-defense. He said that Jack had hit her while they were arguing in their car. And then actually a witness came forward and told cops that he had to break the couple up after he saw Jack choking her in the front seat of the car. So the police tried, but they were not able to find the gun that was used. And because of that, they weren't able to really get her on a murder charge because there just wasn't a whole lot of proof.
Right.
She was charged with manslaughter instead of first-degree murder, but they actually sentenced her to 20 years in prison.
Wow.
I think the reason that they gave her so much time was because several witnesses had come forward saying that weeks before that she had been threatening to kill him.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. And then years later, she confessed that she actually buried her husband with that gun.
Man, she sounds like a piece of work.
Yeah, so she went to the funeral home, and when she was saying her goodbyes, she put the gun in there with them.
Wow. She was not one to be messed with.
While she was in prison, her attorney appealed her 20-year sentence. He was like, look, this is too much. This is a manslaughter charge. There was domestic violence involved. She did kill him, but it was self-defense. And so in 1968, Marie got out on bond, a $500 bond, while she waited for the ruling on that appeal.
I didn't know that you could get out on bond while you're waiting for an appeal.
I didn't either. I don't know if that still happens or if that was just a thing of the time, but that's...
Okay.
Yeah. While she had been in prison, though, in 1967, her teenage son, Lloyd Dean, and his friend Eddie Daly, they robbed a gas station together in Leesburg. One of them had pointed a gun at the clerk. They got away with the whole $60. They didn't physically hurt anybody, although I'm sure that clerk was shook up. But the boys ended up running away from the crime scene and being caught, or about 3 weeks later. Now, Lloyd, he was represented by a public defender, her son. And his friend Eddie had been able to pay for his own attorney. They were both teenagers who had never been in trouble with the law. They didn't have any previous convictions or anything like that. But the public defender had advised her son to plead guilty, because if you plead guilty, your sentence is going to be light because you're not putting the court through a hearing, and it's just better to do that. You'll get less time. So Eddie, the friend, was sentenced to probation for his part when he went to trial.
What did he plead?
Lloyd, he was hopeful, of course, after that. But at court, the prosecutor told the judge how he was really afraid that this teenager was going to turn out like his mother. And apparently the judge agreed with him because Lloyd Dean was given life in prison for his part in that robbery.
That's pretty steep
That's too much.
For a kid, and it wasn't like there was no murder involved. Yeah, and for the other kid to have just gotten probation. Wow.
Yeah, same crime.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was one black and one white?
They were both black.
Okay. Just curious about that.
When Marie found out about this, she was livid.
Yeah.
Especially that the other teen that had the private attorney had gotten probation and her son after pleading guilty because he'd been advised to do so.
Right. I'm wondering, like, at that public defender, seems like he gave some really bad advice.
Well, that's exactly what she thought. And she blamed him. His name was Bob Pierce. And she just felt like he did not fight for her son. She said that her son wasn't advised of his right to a trial by jury and never even signed a waiver saying he didn't want a trial.
Oh.
So Lloyd Dean, he did appeal that, but that appeal failed. Not only had the public defender, Bob Pierce, represented Lloyd, he also represented and pled her daughter, Francina, guilty on a forgery charge, and she was sentenced to 2 years in prison. And so Marie was determined she was getting even with him. On April 22nd, when she was out on her bond in 1968, 37-year-old Vivian June Ritter, Bob Pierce's secretary, drove her white 1965 Chevrolet to work at the public defender's office in Leesburg, Florida. Vivian had worked as his secretary for 13 years. She was married to a man named Tex Ritter, and they had 2 sons, Bobby and David, and a daughter named Lynn. Early that afternoon, her boss, Bob Pierce, he had tried calling her from court. So he had been at court all day, and he had tried to call her to ask her some questions she had written down for him about a client he was representing. But she didn't answer the phone. It was odd, so he kept trying to call back, but wasn't able to get her on the phone. So he got a hold of her husband, who also wasn't able to reach her. Bob Pierce, early that afternoon, went back to the office, and he immediately knew something was wrong. Her cigarettes were sitting on her desk, along with some other things that he just knew she wouldn't have left behind. And there was a man who had had an appointment, and he'd just been sitting there waiting for hours for her. And she was dependable. Something was not adding up. Plus, the guy that was waiting said that when he got there, the front door was open.
And I would think, being a public defender, you probably have to be on your toes about, like, you have to worry about people being mad and coming after you. So your mind would probably go to, hey, something's happened.
Exactly. And so Pierce called the cops. So her husband, friends, family, and police were searching for her everywhere, but were unable to find her. She was missing. They even consulted a psychic. After speaking to witnesses, they learned that Vivian had been the passenger in her own car with a black woman driving. The description matched that of Marie Arrington, which was concerning because she had been making threats, not towards Vivian, but toward the public defender, Bob Pierce. A taxi driver informed police that he had actually dropped Marie Arrington off about a block from the public defender's office that day. Police believed Marie went to the office that day intending to murder Bob Pierce, but he wasn't in, and so instead she came up with a plan to abduct Vivian Pierce. A couple of days later, on April 24th, Vivian's car was located, and hearts sank when heavy blood stains were discovered throughout the vehicle, and especially in the trunk. They knew at that point that she was not going to be found alive.
Right. And poor Vivian, I mean, she's just an employee.
37-year-old, just doing her job.
That's awful.
Sure enough, on April 27th, 3 days after the car was found, the badly decomposed body of Vivian Ritter was found in an orange grove off State Road 44, about 2 miles from Leesburg. She had been shot several times, hit in the head and neck. And when those things didn't kill her, she was run over by her own vehicle over and over again until she died. So her back and her legs were broken. This poor woman had suffered.
That's brutal.
It is. Marie Arrington was arrested that same day. She was charged with Vivian Ritter's kidnapping and murder. Before she was arrested, Marie had also broken into the garage of the judge, Troy Hall, who had sentenced her son to life. Notes were found written to the judge threatening to kill his wife. Police also found Marie's fingerprints and excrement in his garage.
Oh my goodness.
She had tried to lure him out of his home with a phone call. She squatted in his garage and waited in the dark for him to come out. Police believe that she fully planned to kill him.
Yeah.
She waited so patiently that when she needed to poop, she didn't leave the garage. She just did it. And kept waiting.
Is straight up crazy.
The police would later say, had Hall not stayed in his house, she would have blown him off his own porch.
Oh, she absolutely would have.
When police asked where she had been on the day of the kidnapping, Marie said she'd been fishing all day with her cousin. And at first her cousin backed her up on it, but then she came back. She was afraid, probably of Marie too. And so she said, okay, I did lie. Well, when she was confronted with that, then Marie was like, okay, fine, you got me. I was at Bob Pierce's office that day, but I was not the one to kidnap Vivian. I was kidnapped along with her. She said that 2 men had kidnapped them, murdered Vivian, and drove her back to Leesburg, but warned her that she'd better not snitch or else.
I'm surprised that she thinks they're going to buy that.
She took Sheriff Willis McCall to an orange grove in South Lake County, and that spot was later confirmed to be the place where Vivian Ritter was murdered. Leesburg Police Captain Ralph Perry found this envelope in Marie's house that contained Miss Vivian Ritter's watch, the keys to her house, the keys to her car, Bob Pierce's office, and post office box. There was also a note in an envelope that read, if you want to see Mrs. Ritter alive and get her back, call off Willis, McCall's office, and the FBI. Between your office and Troy Hall's, there are 3 boys we want freed in 2 weeks. And guess who one of those boys were?
Lloyd.
Lloyd.
Yeah. So if she had that plan, why did she end up killing Vivian before she took it out?
I don't know.
Maybe Vivian just fought back really hard.
She may have. The 3 boys are to be given their freedom. At that time, you'll be notified where to find Mrs. Ritter. If you do not follow as you are told, you will never see her alive. We will be in touch from time to time to let us know that you received this letter. Mrs. Ritter is safe. She is looking at everything that is being written. If you do not follow our instructions, you will receive the arm that was wearing this watch, and so on until you have every part of her body piece by piece.
Golly.
Marie went to trial for Vivian's murder on November 14th. Just before her trial, her daughter, Francina, was captured in Atlanta after she'd escaped the Lowell Corrections Institute while serving her forgery sentence.
This family is something else. I'm starting to think maybe that sentence for her son, I mean, it was harsh for manslaughter, but they might not have been wrong about assuming they're going to follow in her footsteps. Yeah.
Marie Arrington was known for wearing a full-skirted dark blue dress and sometimes accompanied by a pink sweater to trial. She always dressed and looked stylish. It was later said that her clothes were the only thing that didn't incriminate her.
Wow.
She was described as a chain-smoking, petite, expert forger, a fashionable dresser, a master of disguise, and a cold-blooded killer. Judge Hall testified about the black voodoo doll he'd received with a pin stuck through the heart and the letter threatening his and his wife's lives. He also told how Marie Arrington had defecated in his garage. Among those testifying against her...
That's way before Amber Heard ever thought of that.
Among those testifying against Marie were James McCutcheon, who saw Vivian Ritter in the car with Marie in the driver's seat, Dean Snyder, which was the forest investigator who'd found Vivian's body, Joseph Smith, the cab driver, who took Marie Arrington within 2 blocks of Bob Pierce's office on April 22nd, the day of the disappearance, Mary Wilson, Marie Arrington's mother, who testified that she'd seen Marie in Vivian Ritter's car the day of the disappearance.
So her own mother had testified. She probably was subpoenaed, but sounds like she still told the truth.
Did, yes. Yeah. And then Marie's landlady also testified that she'd actually given her a .22 because Marie said that she needed protection. And ballistics test proved that Vivian had been killed with a .22 caliber revolver. Some of the most damning evidence had come from Marie's own mother, who testified that she received a telephone call the same day that Mrs. Ritter was reported missing. That call had come from another one of her daughters. She was instructed to drive a short distance from where Mrs. Ritter's car was found. Marie's mother, Mary, said that she followed the instructions and was driving along State Road 44 between Leesburg and Eustis when a parked car blinked its lights. She said she stopped and a voice had said, "Follow me." We went down a dirt road. She said that shortly after, her daughter, Marie, walked up to the car and got in. According to her mother, she asked, Marie, "Hey, whose car is that?" She said that Marie told her not to say anything about that car being left in the woods or she was liable to get killed.
She said that to her mom.
To her mom. Several days later, she started getting threatening phone calls. Because I think Marie was trying to make it look like it was somebody else, like it wasn't her. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, so she was saying that she wasn't threatening her mom. She was trying to make her think that somebody
else was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this other note was read out loud by investigators that was found at her residence. It was addressed to Circuit Court Judge Troy Hall's wife. It said that a pistol was pointed at her head, and unless she went with the author of the note, which of course was Marie, she was going to be shot. Now, the note was never delivered, but...
because they didn't come out of the house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A female Grove worker testified that she'd seen a white car drive past with two women, one black, one white, and then shortly afterwards, drove away, and then she heard what she believed to be gunshots. Another Grove worker also testified that they had heard those gunshots as well. On December 6th, an all-white jury of 10 men and 2 women found Miss Marie Arrington guilty of first-degree murder and did not recommend mercy. The judge said, "I can't give you any mercy. You've committed a terrible crime, and I think the jury verdict, based on the evidence, is the right one." The jury had deliberated about 3 hours. She was sentenced to death by electrocution. Remember, she's still saying she had nothing to do with this. She did not do this. That, this was other people, and that she was, so she's not admitted to anything. She was doing her time in prison, basically awaiting for her death sentence to be carried out. And then between 3 and 3:50 a.m. on March 1st in 1969, she used cigarettes and matches to burn a 9x14-inch hole in a wire mesh covering her window. Then she shoved herself through a hole wearing her pajamas and scaled 2 barbed wire fences. She actually hid out in her own neighborhood of Leesburg for a while. And of course, nobody turned her in. They were terrified.
Well, they're scared of her, yeah.
Yeah, and now she's escaped from prison. So it's like, this lady's indestructible. And she's clearly hell-bent on revenge when she sets her mind to it.
Yes. And there's obviously no guarantee that they can hold her once they get her. So
right.
I'd be afraid.
And of course, you can imagine the public defender, Bob Pierce, and the judge and everybody else is probably very uneasy about
their
her
wives.
Sure.
Yeah. She
became the second woman to be put on the FBI's 10 most wanted list.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. She was on that list from May 29th, 1969 until she was captured on December 22nd in 1971. So she was out almost 3 years.
Yeah.
She was captured in New Orleans. She was actually working at a lunch counter at a drugstore as a waitress. She went by the name Lola Williams. She was so brazen. She said she was never really afraid. She just lived her life. Sometimes she would want to look over her shoulders, but she just didn't let herself give in to that. And she just acted completely normal. The only time she was ever uneasy was when post office workers would come in because she was on those most wanted posters. Yeah. it used to tickle her when she would pick up the papers and read that she had been cited in California and New Jersey.
Wow.
She described herself as a loner and a proud person who was just very strong-willed. Anyway, though, the FBI got a tip one day. Well, they were actually tapping phone lines. So they tapped her mother's phone line, even her pastor's phone line. And she did make a call to her pastor.
Oh, man.
And it was through that they found out where she was at. So the FBI sent an agent out there to New Orleans to that lunch counter she was working at, ordered a cup of coffee. He took that coffee cup and matched the fingerprint. And from that, they were able to arrest her.
That's smart.
She claimed that a couple of weeks before her capture, she knew that they were on her trail. And she said that she could have ran, but she was tired. She just wanted to see her kids.
Well, I was wondering if she had, like, what happened to her kids and if she had seen them.
By the time Marie got back to prison, the Supreme Court in Florida had found the death penalty unconstitutional. And so her sentence was commuted to life in prison. Now, when she was rearrested, she was considered too much of an escape risk to be put back into the women's prison.
Oh, yeah.
They were like, we're not taking a chance on that. They thought she was too cunning and deadly to interact with other prisoners, even guards. I think, too, they probably needed to protect her as well because she was in a men's prison.
Oh, yeah.
Like an all men's prison. They kept her in solitary.
Yeah, I don't know. I think those men probably would have been afraid of her because she was straight up crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Like, she was brazen and fearless. I think she probably could have held her own.
And she was little. You know, she only weighed like 127 pounds when all this was happening. Now, in prison, in solitary, obviously, getting 1 hour of exercise every day and, you know, spending all the rest of her time behind bars watching. She said she got to watch Jeopardy, which that was her favorite show. And she ate lots of Almond Joy candy bars. And she had gained a lot of weight in a short amount of time. I mean, I'm sure it's depressing. I mean, that's okay. Like, I feel like when you live a life like that, you're bound to be. During an interview in 1973, she said that she'd have rather had the death penalty than life in prison. She said that way, at least you know what's coming.
Really?
She said, though, that she would have done it all over again. Now, she never admitted to the murders, but she was saying the life of crime because she said that she'd have done anything for her kids. She said she's done things she could have gotten 100 years for, but was never caught for. She said, I had kids to take care of. To provide for them was right, even if I had to do it the wrong way. Well, she was described by the prosecuting attorney, though, as a mad dog killer who had the cunning of a wild animal. Marie would later say that they called her that because she said, I live by one rule. If you don't want it done to you, don't do it to me. Any animal in the jungle is going to fight like hell if she has babies, no matter what I've done wrong. I'm still mama to my kids.
Well, she's not wrong about that part.
Right.
At all.
Right. Now, in solitary confinement, she felt like she was going stir crazy. And actually, she was in solitary confinement for 18 years.
Wait, what? 18 years?
18 years. And I do kind of feel like that's excessive.
That is very excessive.
I was listening to a man who interviewed her, and even like one of the wardens who said, the crazy thing is she's not even the most dangerous. Like, we have child killers in here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's a lot.
I mean, was that just because they were afraid of her getting out? Like, escaping again?
I think it was almost to prove a point. Now, she did again. She says she wasn't attempting an escape, but she almost got out of the men's prison, too.
Oh, wow.
But when she got caught that time, she was crying. She was with another man, and they had hooked up, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But she says she was not trying to escape. She said that she was just like with that guy because she said she had like zero human companionship.
Okay.
Because even the guards weren't allowed to talk to her because they were saying she was too like cunning.
Yeah.
In that regard, I kind of feel bad for her.
Yeah, I kind of do too. I mean, 18 years, that's kind of, I can't really fathom that.
No.
How anybody could not be fazed by that.
Right.
That's a lot.
Right, it is. Now, she did start fighting legally, not to get out of prison, but to get out of solitary confinement. And I can't say that I blamed her. She said that she actually loved solitude, but after 18 years, I mean, you got to think the Mad Dog Killer is arthritic and gray haired and overweight. She's an old lady.
Yeah.
She did a terrible thing, but that's a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
For a long time. She said that she felt like, with this suit that she filed, she said she felt like the treatment that she had received was cruel and unusual punishment because she was being detained at a men's facility and she wanted to go back to the women's prison at Lowell so that she could just be a regular prisoner.
Yeah.
I mean, even if it's a maximum security prison, fine. Yeah, sure. Put her in maximum security.
But I can also see their reluctance to do that because she has escaped successfully.
She did, but there was a window there that they were told was risky. They needed to fix, and they did not.
Okay, well.
And so that was partly on them. I'm sure part of it was that she was Black. It was a very racist. I mean, I just listened to how they kind of talked about her too.
Okay.
I think that was part of it. Mm-hmm. I don't think it was all of it. She did some terrible, she earned her reputation, but I think at the end they were like really punishing her for kind of showing them up too.
Yeah.
She did an interview later and she said that she had this reoccurring dream that she was with her kids and they all lived in this big house and that they were running a store together. Marie Dean Arrington died from heart complications at 80 years old on May 10th in 2014 at the Florida Department of Corrections in Ocala, Florida.
Wow.
So it's just a sad story all the way around. But I will say that the man who put her in prison, the judge who convicted her, he actually, wanted her to be put to death. When she died, he said, good. If there's a heaven or hell, she's going to be in hell.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, that's the story of Mean Marie Dean Arrington.
Wow, that was a crazy one.
Do you have any thoughts?
Well, so it reminded me of a book I read recently about a master thief. Her name was Doris Payne. And she was also a Black woman who grew up during, racial times.
Sure.
And poorly and had a rough background. And she became a master of disguise.
Wow.
And she was also very, petite and stylish. And she went on to a whole life of crime. Now, hers weren't so much violent crimes. Hers were stealing large amounts of diamonds and conning people.
Okay.
But eventually she did get caught and went to prison, and she ended up dying in prison. It was a very fascinating story. So when you started, in my mind, I was thinking, oh, this sounds familiar. And then I realized very similar stories there.
Yeah, it's funny how, you end up a little bit feeling sorry for her, but I do not want to forget that poor lady.
Yes,
that she
who was murdered.
Brutally killed and never admitted to killing and never really showed any remorse for.
Right. And there was really it was senseless too, because that lady had done nothing to her.
She was really just going to use her to try to get her son out. I mean, I don't necessarily think she intended to kill her to start with.
Right.
But it's what happened. And clearly she was the kind of person that would do what she had to do. Now, I did read one article and I didn't go back and do a ton of research, but I do know that her son ended up getting out of prison around 30 years old. And honestly, like you were saying before, that may have been the best thing for him. I don't think he reoffended from anything, that I saw.
Yeah.
And so he may have spent enough time in there because he spent 12 years in prison. And maybe that might have all been very traumatic for him.
Sure.
I'm sure he did not mean for he was a kid.
Right.
And so maybe with all that happening, it ended up maybe setting him on the straight and narrow. Maybe his mom somehow inadvertently did help him in the long run.
In the long run, yeah. Wow. Well, those were some hard times.
Yes, they were.
Darlene and Melody want me to let you know that here at Hard Times and True Crimes, we appreciate your listener support. and they want me to remind you about the Buy Me a Coffee link that you can find on the website or in the show notes. But I'm going to be honest with you. Those girls don't share ne'er a bit of that coffee with me. Not a single drop. So you get on there and you buy 2 coffees, and you let those girls know that they're both for me. Because revenge is a drink best served with a little cream and sugar. And then you make sure you tell everybody you know, even if you need to get even with them, to check out Hard Times and True Crimes. Till next time, goodbye.